From Chicago studios, this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I am Samana, Siddiqui. First, the headlines. 2 decades on, Muslims in the U.S. still suffer Islamophobic backlash. Hashtag Handsoffmyhijab, how global hijab bans impact Muslim women. World population to reach 8 billion on November 15th, UN says. Global hunger figures rose to 828 million in 2021. Bosnia marks 27th anniversary of Srebrenica genocide. Halal food industry is forecast to hit $1.38 trillion by 2024. Our top story tonight. Muslims represent a small but rapidly growing portion of the U.S. religious landscape. But as the community expands, the Islamophobic backlash in a post-September 11th America also continues. Pew Research Center projected about 3.85 million Muslims were living in the U.S. by 2020, roughly 1% of the total U.S. population. Growth has been driven largely by the continued influx of Muslim immigrants, with roughly 60% of U.S. Muslims 18 and older born outside the country. Muslim immigrants from South Asia make up a majority of the population. Half of Americans, including a large majority of Republicans, say Islam encourages violence. That is twice the number who held that view in early 2002. Americans were also more likely to say they believe Muslims face a lot of discrimination compared to other religious groups, per a 2021 Pew Research Center survey. The Institute for Social Policy and Understanding's American Muslim Poll 2020 found Muslims experience religious discrimination more than any other group. 2 people threw what resembled a Molotov cocktail at a large metallic crescent moon symbol outside a Long Island, New York mosque. Authorities are treating the July 3rd attack at the Fatima az-Zahra Mosque as a hate crime. It came just days before the Islamic holiday of Eid al-Adha. The mosque's imam, Ahmad Ibrahim, heard a big explosion and then saw flames. A neighbor helped put out the fire. No one was injured. Authorities later determined an ignited device was deliberately thrown at the general vicinity of the mosque, or specifically at the crescent moon symbol. Afaf Nasher, executive director at the Council on American Islamic Relations in New York, said this is the first time the mosque community has experienced such hate. On Monday, Manuel Oliver, whose 17-year-old son was killed in the 2018 mass shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, interrupted President Joe Biden's speech. Biden was speaking about the recent passage of a gun safety package. Critics have warned the legislation is far too tepid to substantially reduce gun violence in the U.S. Oliver blurted out, "We have to do more than that," as Biden spoke. He was among several gun violence survivors and family members in attendance at the White House ceremony. Some in the audience applauded Oliver, who was escorted from the event. Biden called the passage of the bipartisan Safer Communities Act meaningful progress. The president acknowledged the new law is not enough. It does not include universal background checks or a ban on assault weapons. The hijab, a head covering worn by observant Muslim women, has been a fixation for global politicians for years. There have been a series of international bans on religious garments in schools and government buildings. Leading the way is France, home to the largest population of Muslims in Europe. The country has passed strict legislation limiting the religious freedom of Muslim women who see hijab as part of their faith and identity. In 2004, the French government banned religious garments from public schools. A study on the relationship between France's hijab ban and the success of Muslim girls in school showed worse educational outcomes. It also found Muslim girls were less likely to complete secondary education and more likely to drop out after the implementation of the hijab ban. The Canadian province of Quebec similarly passed a law in 2019 that forbids the wearing of hijabs and any type of head or face covering for government employees, including school teachers. More recently, the Indian state of Karnataka passed a ban on the hijab being worn in schools last March. On Monday, human rights activists criticized a report that President Joe Biden is considering lifting the U.S. ban on the sale of offensive weapons to Saudi Arabia. Reuters reports Saudi officials are pressuring the Biden administration to end its policy of selling only defensive arms to the kingdom. Biden is preparing to visit Saudi Arabia later this week as part of a wider Middle East tour with stops in Israel and the occupied West Bank. Sanjeev Berry, executive director of Freedom Forward, calls Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman one of the most brutal dictators on the planet. Reuters reports a final decision on an arms policy shift depends upon whether the Saudis make progress toward ending its 8-year war in neighboring Yemen. The world's population is expected to hit 8 billion people on November 15th. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said the milestone is a reminder of our shared responsibility to care for our planet. It's also an opportunity to reflect on where we still fall short of our commitments to one another, he said. The UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs made the forecast. The global population is growing at its slowest pace since 1950, the agency said. It should hit 8.5 billion in 2030 and 9.7 billion in 2050. By the 2080s, the population will peak at around 10.4 billion people before leveling off until 2100. The number of people affected by hunger globally grew to 828 million in 2021. That's an increase of about 46 million from 2020 and 150 million since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, a United Nations report said. The document also shows that the world is moving further away from its goal of ending hunger, food insecurity, and malnutrition by 2030. Cindy Hollerman, a Food and Agricultural Organization economist and editor of the report, said the increases are sharper where people are experiencing economic slowdowns. The pandemic, conflict, or climate factors and high levels of inequality have led to the increases. Bosnia marks the 27th anniversary of a genocide. Details after the break, so stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
Sound Vision has a summer plan for your kids. Keep them busy and having fun. With creative teaching methods, songs, stories, art projects, and more. Amazing teachers and role models. Lessons that build love for Allah, positive identity as a Muslim. Summer fun has just begun. Learn about animals in the Quran, Arabic vocabulary, beautiful names of Allah, science in the Quran, visit distant Muslim lands, learn fun facts about the country, the people, and how to cook special dishes, all from the safety and convenience of your home. Visit academy.adamsworld.org for more details. Hurry.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Mr. Speaker, if I decide to wear a turban, or you decide to wear a cross, or he decides to wear a kippah or a skull cap, or she decides to wear a hijab or a burqa, does that mean that it is open season for right honourable members of this House to make derogatory and divisive remarks about our appearance? For those of us who from a young age have had to endure and face up to being called names such as Towelhead or Taliban, or coming from Bongo land, we can appreciate full well the hurt and pain felt by already vulnerable Muslim women when they are described as looking like bank robbers and letterboxes. So rather than hide behind sham and whitewash investigations, when will the Prime Minister finally apologise for his derogatory and racist remarks? Racist remarks, Mr. Speaker, which have led to a spike in hate crime. And given the increasing prevalence of such incidents within his party, when will the Prime Minister finally order an inquiry into Islamophobia within the Conservative Party, something which he and his Chancellor promised on national television?
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
your eyes.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, it's your brother Zain Bika from South Africa. One of the first educational programs ever produced for Muslim children was the ever popular Adam's World series. The colorful and comical Muslim puppets stole the heart of a generation. Sound Vision will be releasing brand new episodes of Adam's World with the launch of a Adam's World app. Subscribers will enjoy new Adam's World episodes as they are released, as well as all the classic episodes of Adam's World. So visit adamsworldapp.com now to learn more, subscribe and enjoy new adventures of Adam and his friends. And let's keep helping tomorrow's Muslims today. Assalamu alaikum.
It's Adam's World. Believe me, there's a lot to see. Bismillah. Let's explore.
To stop this genocide, we need your help.
Welcome back. On Monday, Bosnia and Herzegovina marked the 27th anniversary of the Srebrenica genocide with a memorial service for 50 newly identified victims of the 1995 massacre. Every year on July 11th, newly identified victims of the genocide are laid to rest at a memorial cemetery in Potokari, eastern Bosnia. Thousands of visitors from various countries attend the service. The memorial center is a focal point for people to remember the more than 8,000 victims, mostly men and boys, murdered by Bosnian Serb militias. After this year's funeral, the number of burials in the cemetery rose to over 6,000. The youngest of the victims buried this year was 16-year-old Salim Mustafic. The oldest was 59-year-old Hussein Krijic. When Russia invaded Ukraine, 43-year-old Mufti Said Ismailov resolved to step aside from his religious duties to fight for his country. Ismailov is among the Muslim spiritual leaders of Ukraine and has served as a mufti for 13 years. He began training with a local territorial defense battalion at the end of last year as the attack became imminent. Ismailov had fled Russia in 2014 when Moscow-backed separatists captured the city of Donetsk in eastern Ukraine. 8 years later, he was at the heart of Moscow's assault on Kyiv. He decided this time, I would not run away, I would not flee, but I would fight. On Saturday, Ismailov was one of dozens of Ukrainian Muslims who gathered at the mosque in the town of Konstantinivka to mark Eid al-Adha. It is the last remaining mosque still operating in the area, where a battle for control of the region is intensifying. Ismailov told the AP that there are around 30 mosques in the region in total, but that most are now in the hands of the Russians. 3 generations of family members were huddled on the back of a pickup truck for what started as a joyful ride through the Syrian countryside. Abdulaziz al-Uqab and his relatives had planned a simple family picnic when a landmine explosion killed 21 family members. Uqab suffered not only light wounds that day in February 2019, the blast killed his wife, 2 of his sons, 4 of his siblings, an uncle, and other family members, and left others maimed. The 41-year-old told AFP people live in fear of this faceless killer that could be anywhere. While airstrikes and shelling have decreased in recent years, remnants of explosives are claiming more lives in Syria than anywhere else, the United Nations said. The world and most African countries marked the first World Kishwahili Language Day last Thursday. UNESCO member states declared July 7th as World Kishwahili Language Day. Swahili is one of the top 10 most spoken languages in the world. In Africa, it is the most widely used native language. It enjoys national status in Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda. It is also widely spoken in parts of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Rwanda, and Burundi. Kenyans gathered at the Kenyatta International Convention Center to celebrate the use and importance of Swahili. Swahili is a mixture of languages from different countries. It takes 40% of its vocabulary from Arabic and was initially spread by Arab traders along the eastern coast. It is spoken by more than 200 million people in Africa and the Middle East. The halal food industry is forecast to hit $1.38 trillion by 2024, according to Food and Beverage News. The Islamic economy is made up of 7 sectors. Halal food is the second largest, with Muslim consumers spending over $1 trillion in 2019. From 2018 to 2020, global halal product launches jumped by 19%. Of those products, 63% came from Asia, followed by Africa and the Middle East. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned, and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour, walk a mile in my shoes, walk a mile in my shoes.
Mr. Speaker, if I decide to wear a turban, or you decide to wear a cross, or he decides to wear a kippah or a skull cap, or she decides to wear a hijab or a burqa, does that mean that it is open season for right honourable members of this House to make derogatory and divisive remarks about our appearance? For those of us who from a young age have had to endure and face up to being called names such as Towelhead or Taliban, or coming from Bongo land, we can appreciate full well the hurt and pain felt by already vulnerable Muslim women when they are described as looking like bank robbers and letterboxes. So rather than hide behind sham and whitewash investigations, when will the Prime Minister finally apologise for his derogatory and racist remarks? Racist remarks, Mr. Speaker, which have led to a spike in hate crime. And given the increasing prevalence of such incidents within his party, when will the Prime Minister finally order an inquiry into Islamophobia within the Conservative Party, something which he and his Chancellor promised on national television?
They took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
We are Justice for All. Headquartered in the heart of downtown Chicago, Justice for All is a global humanitarian initiative dedicated to raising awareness for human rights concerns impacting vulnerable minority groups. Our diverse team of staff and volunteers, led by Imam Malik Mujahid, work tirelessly to help Justice for All achieve their goals. We promote policies that protect religious freedom, address the root causes of mass displacement, and recognize the plight of refugees and forced migrants. Together, we can continue to stand up for justice. Justice for all.
Welcome back. Representative Rashida Tlaib is trying to fix the Espionage Act and introduced an amendment to stop prosecution of whistleblowers. To discuss this in detail, let's go to Edward Ahmed Mitchell. Over to you, Edward.
Thank you, Samana. Today we move to a discussion of something that has been haunting our country for years, if not decades, and that is the abusive treatment of whistleblowers by our government. Some of the names you know, Private Manning, Rally Winner, Julian Assange, but now there's a potential for our government to do something about it in the form of an amendment that Representative Rashida Tlaib has submitted. To discuss this and more, happy to bring on our guest, Kevin Gosztola, who is an American journalist and author. He's known for his work on whistleblower cases, WikiLeaks, national security, and civil liberties. He is the managing editor of Shadowproof, and we're very happy to have him with us today. Kevin, good afternoon. How are you?
Hey, it's good to be speaking with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. So first, I told people just a little bit about what you do, but tell us a bit about your work on issues related to whistleblowers, national security, government overreach.
For like 10 to 12 years, I've been covering the Manning case, the Assange case, covering whistleblowers that have been prosecuted in between, particularly focused on the Espionage Act, which we'll be discussing today, and the way in the United States that for over 100 years this law has existed, but in the last half century, the U.S. government has been developing it into a tool that can be brought against whistleblowers, brought to bear against them when they speak their truth. We first saw it prominently against Daniel Ellsberg, but I run this newsletter at thedissenter.org that I have people subscribe to. It's a free newsletter, and they can follow whistleblower stories, whether we're talking about government or corporate or other institutions that people are blowing the whistle against. I've found it important to follow people who are willing to speak up despite the obstacles that they may face and the very real threats that they may face to themselves, both criminally and within their own personal lives.
Absolutely. Before we talk about Representative Tlaib's amendment, can I ask you just tell us a bit about the Espionage Act and how it's kind of almost a foolproof government way to convict someone of a crime, even if they've turned over information of war crimes, of criminal behavior by the government, even if later it turns out that what they exposed was unconstitutional. None of that matters. I'm a lawyer, you're a reporter. When you go into court, the Espionage Act, tell us a bit about how strict it is and how harmful it is to whistleblowers when it's used by our government the way it's being used for so many years.
Yes, the Espionage Act, as it exists right now, is used much like a lot of different laws in this country. Anybody who has a basic understanding of the criminal punishment system knows that many people plead guilty to offenses just because they're told that they're not likely to win their trial. And they'll take whatever short or not lengthy sentence they can get from prosecutors to diminish the amount of time they will serve in prison. And that's the case with the Espionage Act. And it's really difficult for someone who's accused of violating the Espionage Act to win in a courtroom. And so one of the reasons, which we'll be getting into, is because there is no public interest defense, in the sense that if you are accused of leaking classified information and you are accused of releasing information that could advantage a foreign power or cause injury to the United States, and then you are put under a microscope before a jury or a judge, you don't get to talk about your motive. You don't get to talk about why you did it. Just the fact that you released the information is the crime, which makes you guilty and someone who could be punished and put behind bars for multiple years.
Right. Exactly. And that's why, some whistleblowers have been so resistant to subjecting themselves to that process. They'd be willing to take responsibility and account for what they did in a fair process, but not when the game is rigged and then they have no chance whatsoever, no matter what they did or why they did it. So now that brings us to Representative Tlaib's amendment. Tell us about it. What would it do?
Yeah, so this amendment would, and first off, I just want to acknowledge that there is a reasonable debate to be had about whether we should allow the Espionage Act to still exist in this country. It's over 100 years old. It passed in a time when Woodrow Wilson was president, and there were a lot of laws against what they called sedition that were being introduced to go after people who were speaking out. Primarily, the Espionage Act was passed to stop people from speaking out against U.S. involvement in World War I. So the proposals from Rashida Tlaib is basically that you would add an affirmative defense to it, which would mean that you could say that you engaged in this conduct because you wanted to expose malfeasance, you wanted to expose fraud, you wanted to expose wrongdoing by the government, something specific that you had in mind when you released those documents, and that you would have that available, that you would have both. It's kind of twofold. There's an affirmative defense, but then there's also the fact that if you engaged in the prohibited conduct, that you could basically say it was necessary to expose this information because you were engaged in whistleblowing. And as I said before, right now, you are prohibited from saying that. Your knowledge that the information is classified and your knowledge about, what would happen if it's released to some degree are the only things that can help you as someone accused convince a judge or jury that you are not guilty. Other than that, you're going to be put in prison.
Yeah. And the sentences we're talking about here, Kevin, they're not light sentences usually. If you're convicted, especially if there's a trial, you're talking potentially decades of your life. And we know some people, Reality Winner, I think was 5 years. Private Manning got out early due to a pardon. Edward Snowden is obviously very concerned about what would happen to him. And Julian Assange, his lawyers have argued that his life would be in danger if he is sent here to face trial for the charges against him. Tell us about what's going on with the Julian Assange case. Why does the United States government want him? What are they accusing him of doing? And right now, it looks like he's on the verge of being sent here. What's the status of his case in the United Kingdom?
Yeah, so as you were saying, if you're accused of violating the Espionage Act, you could go to prison for up to 10 years per charge. He faces 17 accusations of violating the Espionage Act, and that's why his attorneys say that he faces 170 years potentially in prison if they gave him the maximum offense. He's also got a computer crime charge that he faces, so that's why you'll hear them say he could be in prison for up to 175 years. So that's serious. For anyone who gets accused, you usually see that result in somewhere from a 3 to 6 year sentence. It's gotten worse in recent years. Reality Winner had the harshest sentence. And it doesn't matter whether you release one document or you release 1 million documents. So right now they're going after Julian Assange, and he's a publisher. It's different than a lot of the cases we've been talking about here. Those people we've named were working for the government. They had security clearances. They had signed agreements agreeing to not disclose the information. But Julian Assange is a journalist and somebody who published information that exposed war crimes. In fact, you're talking to me on the anniversary of one horrific war crime that they made public, which is in the collateral murder video that shows the 2007 Apache helicopter attack on 2 Reuters employees, as well as someone who drove up a van and had his children with him and was killed as he was trying to rescue them after they had been wounded by this unit that had opened fire on the Reuters employees. And that became known as the collateral murder video. And so Julian Assange faces this potential of being brought to the U.S. and being put on trial because the UK government has authorized his extradition. And I'm not sure what an amendment to the Espionage Act would do, as we discussed from Rashida Tlaib. And it also should be mentioned that Ilhan Omar now supports this amendment as well. But certainly, if he had a public interest defense and could explain to a jury or judge why he published the documents and why his press freedom should be supported, that would be a good thing and would help him overcome the political case against him.
Now, Kevin, the other interesting thing here is you are a journalist, right? Julian Assange is saying, look, I'm a journalist. I published the information. The government is saying he had some sort of role in acquiring the information and therefore he crossed the line. But it's fascinating because he's not an American citizen. He has no duty of loyalty to the United States at all whatsoever. And our government obviously does all manner of spying on people all around the world. And the people who were depicted in these videos, including the collateral murder video that you talked about, I remember that video, horrific. They're not facing charges for murder, right, for what they did. They're living their lives, as far as we know, peacefully and freely. And the man who exposed them is the one who's facing a potential for decades in prison. Legally, all this doesn't matter, but just the moral inconsistency of it is somewhat remarkable to me. Now, but tell me about the journalistic issue here, because obviously there is a difference between a journalist who gets information and publishes it, like Glenn Greenwald did with Edward Snowden stuff, and a journalist who might actually hypothetically play some role in quote unquote sealing the information. Is there a distinction there that is relevant to Julian Assange? Does the prosecution of him endanger press freedom in general? If so, why?
Yeah, and I think it's actually important for us to acknowledge that he is a journalist. I do believe it matters. I think it makes it easier to prosecute him, and it puts all of our rights in jeopardy because all of us have freedom of the press. It's the only profession in the U.S. Constitution that we all see and recognize as being protected. And all of us can engage in acts of journalism. And we do with the platforms that we have available, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, whatever. All of us have ways in which we can be journalists and we can tell what is happening in our community. So we may not be professionals, but all of us want to have protections and not be attacked for engaging in acts of journalism. And the New York Times and some of these other publications have called Julian Assange a source. They don't feel comfortable working with him as a partner. They don't see him as a collaborator, but he was never a source. That term does not have any logical meaning in the way that they're applying it, because just because he gave them the documents doesn't mean he originated them. He didn't have access to the materials in the US government. He got those materials from Chelsea Manning or Private Manning, and those materials were then shared with media partners, the New York Times, The Guardian, a German newspaper called Der Spiegel. And then when we're talking about the diplomatic cables that people may recall, he worked with dozens of media organizations throughout the world. And he was not a source, he was a collaborator. They were working on it. He had an editorial team, and he went through all the motions and functions of journalists. He also contacted the Pentagon and the State Department, warning them about what could happen, if they didn't help him redact material. Asked them for help in redacting material to protect people from harm. And so I think he has the responsible nature to care about what would happen if this was published, and to care about how it is shared with the public.
That's I didn't even know that about the attempt to reach out to the State Department and the Pentagon. And now what's remarkable about this, of course, Kevin, I think most remarkable, is that there is a choice to prosecute him, right? The government is making a choice to prosecute him, and our government is currently led by President Biden, a man who has said that freedom of the press is very important, who has at least verbally shown so much more respect for journalists and the press than his predecessor, and yet he is continuing, his Justice Department is pursuing charges that were filed under the Trump administration. Is there any effort by Julian Assange's family, others, to try to convince President Biden to intervene and stop this, or is there just thought that's not going to happen, he's not going to intervene, and DOJ is not going to change their mind, and this just has to be fought legally?
Well, first, I should tell you that there's a bit of news, because if everything went as expected, President Obrador of Mexico met with Joe Biden today and told him that he objects to the prosecution of Assange as the leader of Mexico, which I think is a huge deal. We haven't heard this from anybody in the world who could be considered a respectable leader. We've heard a few autocrats invoke the Assange case in a way that is very dishonest, so that they can deflect from their own press freedom records. I think the quick point that I would make here as we wind down our conversation is that this is a choice, as you are saying. They are making a choice to prosecute. And if they're making a choice to prosecute, then they're also making a choice not to uphold press freedom. And they're also making a choice to diminish the credibility of the United States when it comes to telling other countries how they should be free, how they should protect journalists, how they should, when they criticize certain individual actions by those government leaders. We hear a lot about countries like Russia, China, Iran. We hear countries named in Latin America. They go after Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua. We have entire democracy summits about press freedom. And then there are huge questions here of why do you keep pushing forward with this when there is no dissent? I must emphasize this, that is unanimous among all global press freedom organizations that they are opposed to this prosecution, and yet the Biden White House doesn't care. And also, I'll say the UK government does not care, because they went forward and authorized his extradition.
Absolutely. Well, people are still raising their voices about this. We will see what happens, God willing, one way or another soon. Thank you, Kevin, so much for shining a spotlight on issues related to whistleblowers, for joining us today. And we look forward to having you back as this situation continues to evolve in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we'll send it back to you, Samana.
Thank you. That's all from our Chicago studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Salam and good night.